let me begin with at the very beginning, the title. What exactly did you have in mind? Is it a individual statement? I mean, are you saying listen to me? Or are you saying that as a society we should be listening to authors? What exactly was in your mind?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked this. Nobody has asked this, and I've been dying to explain. Um, Listen to me is not my personal appeal, or like some reviews have said, it's not a command, it's not an appeal. It's an author, it's any artist who thinks that I have put so much of myself into my work. I have spent so many years of my life in it. Please give me the dignity of your listening, of your watching, of your seeing. And that comes in the last chapter. And I thought, I'm not speaking for myself, I'm speaking for all artists. This is the dignity that artists want of being taken seriously, which I have never been for many years. So perhaps a little of the personal came into it, but it's really meant to be the cry of all artists.
And when you say this is on behalf of all the artists, again, this is a question that you make very clear in your first few chapters, that you are contextualizing your writing in the scene, Indian writing in English. Do you think this is specific to, I mean, people not listening, is that specific to Indian writing in English, or is it writing as a whole, or complete art as a field?
I think it's worldwide, it's general, it's eternal, because I've quoted Bhavabhuti and I've quoted Kalidas and I've quoted Saul Bellow, and I think every artist has the feeling sometimes, what am I doing this for? Is anyone listening to what I say? So therefore, I think it's not specific to Indian writing in English at all. Yeah. I mean, it's the same all over the world.
Yeah, but you do say that your story is similar to the story of Indian writing in English, although the story of Indian writing in English is less interesting than your own story.
No, my goodness, I never said that. I said that the story of Indian writing in English is more dramatic. Dramatic. I mean, there you start, with very few writers published by publishers like Jaiko, and, nobody read them. And then you had R.K. Narayan and Mulk Rajan, and then 2 or 3 of them, they held up the flag for some time. And then for a long time, there was a lull. And then suddenly you have Rushdie and zoomed up. So my story is extremely undramatic, totally. Yeah.
Well, now in that sense, if it is undramatic, how would you describe this book? Is it a writer's autobiography, or is it not at all personal, but as you were saying, this is, of course, there's a lot of personal life in this book, but obviously this is not the life entirely limited to one's own personal life, one's own family, etc. You are also talking about the entire writing scene, etc. So in a way, is this also kind of a biography of not just one person, one writer, but of a particular kind of writing?
That's why I've called it memoirs. Neither biography nor autobiography. And small confession is, when I wrote the first draft, I'm not very keen on making my life for myself public. So I think the first draft didn't have me at all. And I sent it to Kartika, and Kartika said, where are you? So she sort of kind of made me rewrite it. And I realized that you cannot, like my characters, whose lives are connected to an era. So my life is connected to the era I was born in and I've lived in, connected to the literature I'm part of, connected to Indian literature as a whole. So all this was part of what I wanted to say. Yeah. But I'm not the central figure in that, Like, I'm a kind of observer sometimes. Sometimes I'm the complainer, and sometimes I'm the sort of, I look at things with a bit of humor, but I do not make myself the central figure.
Yeah, but you do write very movingly about very personal things, about your childhood in Dharwad, or how Dharwad has changed, how Bangalore has changed. And of course, you also write about Bombay, where you lived for a long while. So, this obviously is not just a family history, but also related to, as you were saying, of the times,
Yeah.
right? And when we are talking about the changing nature of cities, How does that affect a writer?
I think a writer has to move a little away from the change. You cannot write about change while it is happening around you. You know, it has to be seen from a distance. And therefore, I could see Bombay. I lived in Bombay many years ago, and I saw what happened. And only now, when I was writing, I realized what had happened. I did not know it at that time that I was living through tumultuous times. Same thing with Bangalore. I came to Bangalore and we lived in it. It was just Bangalore. It was home. Now that I look back, I notice, you know, that there has been such a lot of change in Bangalore. It's no longer the city it was. So therefore, I think a writer needs a distance. And unless you have that distance, you cannot see correctly.
Was this also why you thought your visit, I mean, your short stay in London was such an important point in your life, in your writing career? The distance that it provided?
Partly, yes. So that I moved, but I had not even begun writing then. So I think more than anything else, it confirmed my view that I'm not able to just sit at home and be a wife and mother. There was something more. And you know, for me, English literature, like many people in those days, was English literature. So that connection which I saw there sort of filled me with a kind of a delight, which I carried home with me.
And since you're talking about your connection with English writing, you quote again and again from Jane Austen. And is that a writer that you really see, not similarities, but affinity with?
I think it's no secret. It's absolutely no secret. I mean, I think she's one of the greatest writers. Like I said, when I read, for my MA, I read, who's that? You should tell me, I forget the name now.
Emma.
No, not Emma, the critic. And when he says that Jane Austen is the greatest, F.R. Lewis, I thought Lewis was the greatest man who ever lived, because, you know, even Jane Austen has now been elevated in these last few years. She wasn't, when I was young, Jane Austen wasn't known so much. And they were just, her books were about balls and parties and, you know, love and courtship and all that. But now she's been elevated very highly, and you understand that through her book she's saying so much more than what you really see.
And is that also a problem with, again, you mentioned how women's writing is very often seen. I mean, you are talking about Jane Austen not being taken seriously because she writes about domestic issues, not the outside world. And is that also why you say, for example, the moment you say in Indian woman and Indian woman writing in English, certain presumptions are made. And you write very irritatedly about how people make such assumptions about Indian women writing in English.
Yeah. I mean that was what surprised me. You know, here was I, very, very middle class woman. My husband was a college teacher, so you can see that we didn't have too much money. And the assumption was that because I write in English, I'm a rich lady and I'm writing like for a hobby. And I was not given the seriousness which I put into my work. And for me, my work was very important. And it's very hard maybe for younger women to believe this now. But definitely there was a kind of a looking down. I remember I wrote something for the Times of India in which I called myself a twit of a housewife writing about other twits of housewives. And Jayant Mahapatra wrote to me, and, you know, I think he was very, he liked that very much. I remember he wrote to me, one of the first very known Indian writers who communicated with me.
Yeah, and you also mentioned how you felt very angry, upset when one of the reviewers glibly labeled you as a grandmother writing or something like that.
I think I need to tell this story. I've kept it within me for so many years that now it's erupting all the time. So this was India Today, which came to interview me as an author. And during the interview, my grandson walked in, and then he went away. And after the thing was over, we had a serious discussion about writing. After it was over and it was published, I find that they have titled that Grandmother Writes Old-Fashioned Way. I almost died on the spot. I can't believe that anyone could be so crass. I mean, I said that I write by pen. I write with the hand. My first few drafts are by hand, and eventually it goes into the computer. He put the two together, my little grandson and my writing, and said, grandmother writes old-fashioned way. When I rang him up, I said, it's not my doing. Somebody at the desk has done that, not me. So then I wrote to the editor, and the editor said, ma'am, we didn't intend any to insult you. And I thought the very fact that they do not know is an insult is an insult. How can they not know that it is an insult to a professional person to be, talked about in this way? I mean, I asked them, do you call Anant Murthy a grandfather? He also had a grandchildren by then. Would you dare to call him a grandfather in a professional interview? So, these are the things which I've had on my mind for many years, and I'm so glad I wrote about them.
And you also make that distinction about fiction being soft, which is supposed to be written by women. Non-fiction is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be written by men. And so men wouldn't like to be known as readers of fiction, etc. So do you think it's still that way?
To some extent, better. I mean, I find younger men much better. They don't come to me and say, this is for my mother, for my wife, etc. Whereas most older men will come and say, this is for my wife, this is for my mother, for my sister. In fact, one day I almost said to one of the men, I said, is your wife the only literate person in your family? Nobody else reads, So now I don't find younger men come and, they read and they talk. And I think there is a definite change. And I'm so happy about that. Yeah.
That's also a hint to those men who are planning to get their books autographed by her later. So be careful about that.
I don't mind autographing for your wives, sisters, girlfriends, whatever. But, don't make it a point to say that I'm not going to read this book. That's what they're saying.
And is that also because you also said very clearly that you don't use language and you use it almost like a prescription. Do not use language to dazzle or impress the reader. Of course, you are quoting. But is that why sometimes you think your writing is not taken seriously?
I don't think so. I think every writer has his or her style. And I don't think that my writing is so lacking in style. Because there is a definite style which my writing has. Dazzlers are there, but not every dazzler has been successful. So I don't think it's very connected. Yeah. I mean, Arundhati Roy is the one person I think who's got away with a lot in language. That is because of many other things, not just the language. So I think it doesn't work. And I believe not in prescriptive language. I believe in language which you use to express what you want. You must have read about my admiration of Gover's book.
Right,
Every student of English should read that book, according to me. It's an amazingly good book. And I think that is my Bible as far as English is
that's
concerned.
Gover's book.
Ernest Gover's.
Ernest Gover's.
Complete plain word.
The complete plain words. Right? And again, if we look at this, you have an entire chapter called Balancing Act, where you talk about how women have to constantly balance their writing and home. And you said that as far as you are concerned, it's not a choice between the home and the world, but you have to find balance between the two. And you kind of described yourself as a rope walker, right?
Yeah.
So again, at a time when probably many people are taking up writing as a profession, do you think that still is something that is...
I think so. I think it's... I was not writing in general about women in this book. I was writing specifically of my own experiences. And I know it was very hard. Two reasons. One is when I write, I take time away from the family. And I'm not earning money. That made me very conscious of the fact that... made me feel guilty. Because at least if you're going for a job, you're earning money for the family. I was not doing that. And secondly, nobody understood that writing was work. I mean, it was like just something you're doing to pass the time. Yeah, it's a good hobby, like I was told 100 times. So it was very hard because you're being disparaged all the time. Somebody asked me, do you write Ducky Goosey stories? Even children's literature you wouldn't describe like that. But give it its dignity. That's exactly why listen to me. So I was very upset over that fact that your work is not taken seriously at all. luckily not many people knew I was writing, which was good for me. And luckily my husband believed in my writing, which was even more good for me. But even then it was extremely hard, between the... So I made a complete kind of compartmentalizing. This time is for the family, this time is for my writing. Total compartmentalizing. There's no other way. And I think even today, most people, working from home is very hard. Whether it's a woman or it's a man, I think it's very hard because you have to discipline yourself first. And that came to me easily, fortunately. What was harder was disciplining other people. People who would ring up and say, I can come, I'll come now and see you, or, you're not busy or something, assuming things. So I think that balancing act was necessary.
Yeah, in fact, she says very clearly that many people think that it's a luxury to work from home, but she says that this is the most difficult thing of working from home, because many people assume, as she just said, that you are not doing anything, so you are at home, so your time is free, and so
available.
yeah, you are available at any point of time, so people can just... I mean, she mentioned somebody calling up, but many times people don't even bother to call up; they just land at your door, and you have...
I had to get the Sahitya Academy Award for people to ring up and say, "Are you busy?" I think that was the best thing the award did for me, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Okay, since you're talking about the Sahitya Academy Award, of course, you have acknowledged, and it's of course a given fact, that that book, that long silence, continues to be probably the most talked about book. And also you mentioned how that book, in a way, released you from a particular kind of state, and after that you could write about other things. So how important was that book, and also that prize for that book?
Yeah, I think the book was very, very hard to write. It was the most personal of my books. Not Jaya's life and my life have nothing to do with each other, but in the sense of the feelings of frustration, of not being able to get time to write, of trying to live your life the way other people expect you to live. And I think this is the hardest thing which, in my generation, women had to do. You tried to be a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter-in-law, etc., etc. And it was very hard for me because I never was a very pliable or a docile girl. And, disciplining myself to becoming that was almost impossible. And if it were not for writing this book, I think I would have been a mess, total mess. But this book, everything which I had thought about and everything which I thought nobody will want to read about, I wrote. And when I finished it, I said, nobody is going to read this book. I didn't know what to do with it. And then Professor Amur suggested I send it abroad, and the rest, I went to Virago and they published it, and then it got the Academy Award and all that. So it was very important because it put me in the category of writers, which I was not until then. I was not even considered a writer until then. So I think every writer or every artist has the one big breakthrough point. For me, that was it. Though I can't bear to read that book, I just cannot read that book. It is so full of anger, so full of anger.
Do you think the fact that it was published by Virago made a difference?
Absolutely. Anything which comes from abroad is highly valued here. Absolutely. I mean, I have no doubt at all about that. And after that, I have had only 2 more books from abroad. So I sank down to where I was before that, published in India kind of person. It mattered a lot. It still matters. Yeah.
And do you think that even Sahitya Academy Award was in a way influenced by the fact that it was published by Virago?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Because that was Keki Daruwala. I don't think Keki is, he told me afterwards he was on the jury.
Yeah.
And he's not the type to be influenced by, he wasn't. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that was very precious because I didn't expect it. I thought I may get it one day when, I'm older than I am now, without teeth, without, everything. So in a way, that was a very pleasant surprise.
And similarly, the book that you were a little disappointed about was, the Binding Wine that you felt. We would like to listen from you, and then probably I'll say what we thought about the book. Okay. But you say that that's a book that probably could have been better.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm one of those authors who say loudly in public, that book of mine is not too good. And I'm always hoping my publishers are not listening to me when I say that. But The Binding Wine, I did feel that it could have been a better book. For the first time, I was coming out of the home into the world. And I think I didn't manage it too well. I mean, this was the story of the rape of a young nurse in Bombay, Aruna Shanbhag, who later became known throughout the country. We lived next door to the nurses' quarters, and we all came to know that she had been raped in the hospital, and she was, in a coma and all that. And I was asked by one magazine to write about it, and I did. And it sort of fled my mind, and then one day it came back to me, and I knew this is a novel I'm going to write. And I think I didn't handle that too well. I do not know. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I do think that it could have been a much better novel. I was slightly disappointed. And I had to have poetry in that. So that, was very hard. Somehow that novel gave me a lot of problems. That's all I can say. Maybe I was a bit smug after that long silence. I don't know.
Yeah. As readers, at least, we have a very different view of the book, because after that long silence, and this novel is completely different. And I think it's a novel which, in a way, for us, shows what that long silence has achieved in terms of releasing a writer to look at the larger issues and connect the dots. You connect how, for example, one woman's life is connected to another woman's life, and another woman's life is connected to another woman's life, and the past, the present, etc. So we thought that actually was a novel which was talking about, well, if you want to call it sisterhood, or the larger issues of women, rather than one particular claustrophobic life of one woman at home. Yeah.
Thank you for saying all that, and I hope every reader who reads it will remember what you're saying about it,
Well, please note it down.
Yeah, please do.
No, but I also taught this novel in the US, and the students there had a different take on this. Of course, they were reading this novel immediately in the context of the rape in Delhi,
Nirbhaya.
which, of course, she rejects calling it Nirbhaya. She names the woman because she feels that naming is absolutely necessary and not just as some anonymous, name. And of course, the students there were reading this novel immediately after the Jyoti Singh rape case. And so they could see that this was a novel published in 1993, and here is an incident that takes place in 2017 or, 12.
15, 14, 12.
2012. And then immediately they could see, nothing much has changed.
Yeah.
And, somebody writing about it. And of course, when I connected that to the, Aruna Shanbhag case, they could, make a connection. But one thing that they felt was that this novel did not have enough introspection, was something that they mentioned. Although for us, because we connected to what was happening around us, it looked so immediate and so powerful.
Yeah.
Whereas for them, it was like there was too much happening all the time in the novel. There wasn't too much introspection. So maybe that's something that that could be.
I was finding my way.
Yeah.
And, after this, I wrote A Matter of Time, in which I think I found my way. So this was important for that reason, because no author, all your novels cannot be exactly of the same quality. And in some you succeed, in some you don't do so well. So I think we need to take all that into account. And I think there are people who respond to different novels very differently. So I think Binding Wine has its own admirers as well. But like I said, I as an author find it a little thing. But Matter of Time gave me the satisfaction which I did not get from The Binding Wine.
Yeah. And, just two other texts that we will just briefly talk about and then throw it open to the floor. One, of course, is Small Remedies and A Matter of Time. And if you could, briefly tell us about the history behind those novels, because it's a fascinating history about her exploration of music, and so on. So do tell us about the how that whole idea of music became such a central idea in that.
I grew up in Dharwad, which is a place where music is very important. It's produced a number of great classical singers. And I remember listening to some music every day when I went to school. I heard only the music, I didn't know who it was. Many years later, it came back to haunt me, that music. And once when I was in Dharwad, after many, many years, and I was staying with the professor who invited me, I heard some music in the morning. I woke up early and I heard this music. It was a chorus. And now I looked out of the window, but there was a very tall compound wall, and I could not see beyond that. I saw nothing. I only heard the music. And I think that memory, this memory, came together to create Savitribai Indorkar. So there I started with the idea of this woman, a classical musician, a Brahmin woman who normally would not go into professional music. That was important. Who gives up her family life, her husband, elopes with her tabalji, trains herself to become a classical singer and achieves it. And this was the life. I was not going to write about her. Somebody else was to write about it. So I had this other character, Madhu, who was going to write this biography of this woman. And I think there, I have a whole chapter about writing of a biography in that. So somehow or the other, this came together in greater harmony than things came together in The Binding Wine. So I feel that, we had these three generations of women. Savitribai was there. Then there was Leela, who is Madhu's aunt, who was a communist in Bombay, lived among the mill workers, and who was a widow, Brahmin widow again, who remarried a Christian doctor. And then there is Madhu, who is works for a small time as a journalist, but who is an obsessed mother who loses her son. So these three generations had to be connected, and they were. And I think I was happy with that.
And a matter of time?
Matter of time, that came from a house. Many, many years ago, I visited a family. There were only women in that, a mother and three daughters, all beautiful, mother and all daughters. There's no man in that house, no mention of a man. And many years later, they came back to me. Another house I saw came back to me, and they came together, and matter of time. And for the first time, my novel moved into Bangalore. Until then, it had never been Bangalore. It went into Maratha history because these people are Marathi-speaking people who have settled in Karnataka ever since Madhavrao Peshwa came. He left behind some people. That was the time of ding-dong battles between the Nizam, the Marathas, Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali. So the result of all that, the Deccan was an area of great conflict, and I have always found it very exciting, the history of this plateau. So all this came together to form the background for the family, and from there I moved into the family history itself and into the people's lives.
And you connected that with an incident from your own life where you were to sell a house and then...
Oh, that's moving on.
That's moving on. Yeah. And that's why, also, if I end with that, you also talked about how very often defining one's identity seems to depend on hating others. And you mentioned how from time to time, for example, you talked about the recent controversy about Hindi being used in Bangalore and so on and so forth. So, this whole identity issue of where does one proclaim one's identity and how does one do it? And you wrote almost kind of very, I would say the word that comes to my mind is very irritated about how one can become so small in terms of defining one's.
In Karnataka, I find that all the time the intellectuals and teachers and Kannada writers are saying, save Kannada. No, save Kannada from what? I wish they knew. I would say save Kannada from these people more than anything else, because the language has to be learned well. You don't have good teachers, and nobody wants to take Kannada, but it should be a language. I totally agree for everyone to learn. But then it's up to the person what to do. And I know a lot of people who voluntarily want to speak in Kannada, write in Kannada. It's there, but you don't make a political issue of it. Like Bal Thackeray, his whole thing was founded on hating. You hate the Malayalis first, then you hate, another community, then the Biharis. So only through hate you can find who you are. You become a Marathi Manus by hating the Bihari. So, I find this absolute, I hope no Shiv Sena people are here. But, hating is to me not the premise on which you can base anything.
And a similar kind of, you also mentioned how disappointed you were, and of course you add that no writer is ever happy with the reviews that he or she gets, but you also said how very often reviewers get everything wrong. Uh, and but I was wondering whether you are aware that Shashi Deshpande as a PhD topic is a big industry.
I know. I know.
So I was wondering whether because she writes in this book about how nobody ever wrote a very good understanding review of her books. So I was wondering whether you actually came across any insightful criticism or reviews of your books and so on.
From academics, no, because the PhD and MPhils, I cannot read them. That language is not for me. But certainly there have been some, like Meenakshi Mukherjee was one of the very good critics, who wrote that. But on the whole, I would say that reviewer criticism in Indian writing in English is very poor. We do not have enough good critics. We do not have enough reputed critics. We do not have critics who are taken seriously. You would still look to the West for a criticism of an Indian book. So I think that is a big problem in Indian writing in English.
And let me just end with one final question about this. You in the beginning of the book, you assert your right to be an Indian writer in English.
Yeah.
And but somewhere towards the later part of the book, you also feel that those who write in Indian languages is probably, I won't use the word, I don't remember the exact word you use, or something like more authentic than those.
No, I never use the word authentic.
Authentic. That's what I'm saying. That's my word, not yours. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that they are closer to.
I felt closer to them.
Yeah.
Than to the Indian
That's
writers
right.
in English. And definitely, I do feel that I belong to the Indian literature as a whole. And I would not, carve out Indian writing in English as a separate this thing from that.
So you would see yourself as part of the Indian writing.
Indian writing, absolutely.
Indian writing.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I know that there are lots of questions, and therefore we are, putting a full stop to the conversation here, and I'll throw it open to the audience. We have 10 minutes, right? So please keep your questions short so that we can get more answers. Thank you very much. First, I saw the first hand here. Please keep your questions brief and to the point.
Madam Deshpande, I would like to know whether your writing in English has any influence of old-time Marathi novelists like Visa Khandekar, Nasi Phadke, Madkholkar, Paranjape, and such others.
I don't read Marathi, so there cannot be any influence. Yeah.
That was a very frank, conversation. We enjoyed it actually. I just was wondering.
Yeah.
In your fiction, mostly we see the personal world, the world of relationships, particularly marital relationships. And then you talked about the turbulent times, how you connect them to the personal world. That came in our discussion, but what I just was interested is, could you throw light on how you keep that distance, or how you connect it to the characters, keeping that distance?
I didn't exactly get the question. What distance?
Distance of the turbulent times from the personal world that you describe in your fiction.
Oh, okay. No, I think any writer has to step out. If the world is a room, you step out of the room to look at it carefully. So I think it comes naturally. There's no effort involved in that at all.
Yeah. Chandana?
Shashiji, you mentioned about the kind of, problems you faced because you were sitting at home and writing. I'd like to say that for the generations, the women that came after you, uh, things are changing,
Yeah.
but not changing at a pace that we'd like to change. So
Yeah.
a lot of things that you faced at that time are still being faced by women.
Yeah.
And this is more like a comment. So I'd like to tell you this, that when a woman who may have spent about 3 decades working as a professional, she will still be introduced as so-and-so's wife through the husband. The husband may not even be around, may have passed. But the first introduction comes from there. And the second will be the woman in her own right as so-and-so. Do we ever use that expression for a man, that he in his own right is also a writer? We never do that. But that continues to happen even today.
It's an unfair world. I think you, I, and most women have realized that. And it will continue to be unfair for many more years. But I'm very hopeful that this 21st century will be the century of women. I see that coming. So I think men have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, it's on.
Hello. Ma'am, so I have very limited knowledge about your books and your views.
Okay.
In my point of view, I have seen many of the stories which you have written, basically portrays around the women and the issues of women and that. And if I'm glad if you can write even about the young men and
Men.
upcoming writers.
Yeah. Okay.
I have written about men also. The world contains both men and women. I cannot write about a world without men, so I have written about men too. But I cannot write with the special knowledge that a man will have about a man. That's the only thing.
Ma'am, when I did my PhD on your work about more than 15 years ago,
Then
I
the
remember-
industry did not begin then.
I remember you used to get very annoyed at being slotted as a feminist writer. And that used to be the case with, any woman who would write in English, any woman who wrote. But do you think things have changed now for women? They're right. I mean, people don't, the minute women write, they don't slot them now, I think. Do you think so too?
I think the word feminism was very much misused at a particular time. And therefore, even if I write about women and if I write about women the way I did, I become a feminist writer. And I had a hell of a time telling people I'm a writer. I'm not a feminist writer, but I'm a feminist in my personal life. So, there's a difference between the two. If I write a feminist book, a feminist novel, it would have been a flop. You cannot write with an ideology at the center of a novel. A novel is life, and there are all kinds of people in it. But today, I think there's a little more understanding, or maybe I'm very surprised, feminism had almost died out. And I saw a lot of young women sort of saying that I'm not a feminist. A matter of pride to say that. I find, especially since this Jyoti Singh's rape and death, that there is a difference. And that more and more young, the Me Too movement, for example, now, it comes out of feminism. What else does it come out of? And good or bad, I think the movement was necessary. There's much bad in anything. So when you talk of Me Too and a lot of men are unfairly attacked and all, definitely it is wrong. But everything has to go through those phases. And I think women have put up with too much for too long. So I think now the word feminism now having a context which goes beyond the theory. It now is more into activism. So therefore, no woman writer will be called a feminist writer.
Sashiji, why do you write and how do you write?
My goodness. I write because I have to. That's what I was born for, I think, that's all. And how do I write is something I need to ask myself. And if you read my book, you will know how I write. So please read my book, you'll get the answer.
And she writes again and again that she's a compulsive reader.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that she cannot do without reading. And even in the most difficult times, she says that she has always read. And I suppose it's also to do with the environment in which you grew up,
Well, I don't know because my sister who grew up in the same environment is not a reader, so
No, because she says that her house was always surrounded by books. She was surrounded by books. And of course, as she says, her sister is a doctor. And she's, of course, a writer. Yeah. There was one question here, please. We have time. Okay. Okay. Two more questions, two hands that I see. Number one here, the gentleman. Yes, please.
Madam, you write in English.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that everybody can, yeah.
Okay, fine. You write in English. English contains 26 alphabets, and many Indian languages contains more than the double the alphabets.
Yeah.
So ultimately, writing is playing with the words or sequencing or desequencing over a chosen area of the subject. So is it easy to select a language which contains a lesser object, lesser alphabets?
Okay.
That is one thing. Next, the art of writing, is it a cognitive behavior customized at the individual level? That's the reason many people do not write, only few people write. Another thing, many people are capable of writing, but they do not write.
I'll forget the first question. Yeah, I don't think any writer chooses a language. Yes, the language comes along with the content. So it comes to you I have 3 languages, but I cannot write in any language but English. I did not choose it. It is my language for writing, that's all. Number 2, you said something about, I told you I'm going to forget.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beyond me. That's beyond me. No. Everybody is not a writer. Thank God for that. Where were the readers then? As it is, we have such few readers. I didn't.
Many of the books are not worth reading. Yeah.
That's up to the reader.
Yes.
You have to experiment.
Yes. I think that's the last question that we have.
Ma'am,
Yes.
I just wanted to tell you that it was one of the most rewarding things to sit here and listen to you today, especially because you talked about your struggle as a woman writing out of home and trying to be taken, trying to get taken seriously with your work. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sure a lot of women who sit here today and who write from home, I write from home, and I cannot tell you the number of times people will call and say, come we'll go for lunch, or come we'll go for, something. And I'll say, I'm doing something, I'm writing. So they'll say, तुला काय उद्योग आहे? तू काय ते कॉम्प्युटरवर काहीतरी करत बसते. So nothing has changed. And I just want to say, how do you get past this? How do you validate what you're writing?
By getting awards.
Oh, okay.
Only when you get awards, people take you seriously.
That's a tough call.
Yeah, so please struggle for an award now, from now on.